John, welcome to the show. I'm extremely excited for this conversation. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast. You said that people don't care about your story. They care about how you fit into theirs. What does this mean?
Hi, Elan. That's just great to be here. I'm really impressed with your track record. Anyway, uh, often when you talk about storytelling has become a buzzword. It's everywhere. Everyone talks about storytelling, and they think they should, well, they tell their story. So we're doing it because of this, or we started in the garage, or we did this kind of thing, and it's all about them, or we do this. And when I'm looking for a product or service, I'm looking for a transformation. I'm looking for how my story will change. So if you can tell their story, of course, how you fit in their story and how that makes a difference, that's much more engaging. And if I'm really interested in what you do, later I'll think, who is this guy? How did they start? What is this thing? But I'm not interested up front. Up front, I'm saying, do you get me? And how are you going to make my life better?
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept because I've always thought about stories as a way like a brand tells you exactly what you're talking about background, how they started, what they're doing, and how they can help you. But it's interesting that you have this view that's more so, okay, how can they fit into my story so that I can be the one to make the transformation. Just so I can understand this a little bit more. So, like, we're talking about the podcast, for an example. How can I make, we're just going to use this as like a hypothetical example because I'm interested, but like for this podcast, how can I fit the story of my podcast of wanting to help people understand how the top 1% of people think and fit it into the story of the listener?
So I wrote a book called Storybuilding, and I have a method. And so I have a theory behind how we encounter a brand. And then I have a number of canvases and things with post-its and to help you do exactly that. So I would think if I'm say I'm scrolling through podcasts looking for one for me, what I'm going to first look for is it for me? I will want to recognize myself as the ideal listener of your podcast. So, you know, what does the top 1% mean? I mean, for me, the top 1% are, the people that know how to be happy, and for someone else, it might be the people that earn the most money.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting.
and so, if you're targeting entrepreneurs, or you're targeting or people just in their life, or you're talking, people that want to learn, or you have something where you think, this is the ideal way to describe, the person that will get the most out of my podcast. And you start by saying, people like you who are trying to do this, are struggling to find that. Well, I have a podcast and this is how blah, blah, blah. And so,
Hmm.
uh, you know, I often say, I live in Switzerland. So if I stumbled on a website that said, we specialize in services for independent consultants with white beards who live in Switzerland who have cats, I would think, ooh, that's interesting. They work with people like me. I don't even know what they're offering yet, and I'm already engaged. But if sometimes you land on a website, and so I'm looking for a CRM, a customer relationship management system, and there's a million of them. And so I land on one, and it looks like it's for big companies. I've already scrolled past. One
Hmm.
says it's the best for teams. I'm not a team. I've already scrolled. You know, I'm a. Anyways, so yeah, so I think that to start with, I would say is for people, your ideal customer or listener or whatever should really strongly recognize themselves as y-
Yeah, that's an amazing answer. Do you think from like a marketing and a business perspective, that there's a huge advantage in the fact that there could be companies, for example, like the way that I think about it is there's leverage in any point. Like if you have, let's say, a lot of money, you might be able to delegate and hire people. But then if you're broke, you might have the time and the grit to want to do something, right? If you're like up here, there's something that the person down here can do to help themselves get up. So in the same way you're saying how you're looking for a CRM and you saw that it was the best one for teams and you thought to yourself, okay, but I'm not a team. Do you think in the same way, if we're applying it to a storytelling model, it's important to make sure that the person that we are trying to fit the story of is as specific as possible and also maybe not getting off center to what they do. Like, for example, you were saying that it was for big companies, it was for teams of CRM, but since you're an individual, it probably would have resonated with you more. You would have fit into the story of another company that would have said, "This is the best for individuals."
Yeah, exactly. Um, you know, so I'm not sure what to add to that in the sense that I think a lot of companies start with what they're doing. And they say, look how this is, we're great. We do this great service, a great product. We have more megapixels than the other guy. And, we do this and that and the other. But um, if you this idea of your customers or your listeners or your audience in whatever sense, this recognition means also that you're getting the right people to engage. Often companies are sort of afraid to lose anyone. So they want it to be why. We do this for everybody. But then it's really for nobody. If I was an accountant, pick something. So I'm an
Mm.
accountant for landscapers. And then people who aren't landscapers will scroll by, but the landscapers will think, wow, they must really know our business. They're the ones I need instead of a generic accountant. And there are enough landscapers out there, or whatever, to make a really good business, but of people that are, that really think, oh, you're the bee's knees, to take a boomer's expression. So it sort of goes along with going into a niche. You can't do a podcast for everybody. So if you can make a podcast for a particular audience that has a particular benefit, well, those people will love it. And if you try to do it, a little bit for everybody, well, no one will really be interested. And so by recognizing myself, that also is, that I'm already engaged before completely understanding what you have to offer. And so then you continue down your funnel. You have a better quality top of funnel somehow. Instead of just, meeting with random people that stumbled by chance, you're meeting with the people, that where you know that they'll get the most value about from what you do.
So you've coached over 100 marketing teams, and as far as the idea goes of picking a niche, what's the threshold? Because it's something that I've always wondered, and this might be a question because of my lack of experience, but what's the threshold between a niche that might be too small and one that might be too big?
Well, first, I think that 90% of the time, if not 99% of the time, I feel that the companies I've worked with don't niche down enough.
Interesting.
Because I mean, that fear of missing out is bigger. And I would say that, I've coached a lot of startups also. And what's interesting with the niche is, you don't have reputation yet. You're trying to get initial traction. You're trying to find your first customers. So having a really narrow niche, you can interest those people. And then you get them to come on, and then you can sort of improve your service and you can get traction and you can build. And then you can widen your niche. You're not just because you at that point in time it was important to have, that was really the best path to have a narrow niche. You can widen it, you can prove your service, you can or multi-niche. I'm an accountant for landscapers and for car dealerships. Well, fine. But so all these things you're never trapped. If that niche doesn't work, either try another one or widen it or something. But I still would say in general, they don't niche down enough.
Yeah, John, you have a great way of making something that's complicated for me sound very simple. So that's a very good answer. I really like that. Shifting gears a little bit, what is the difference between story building and storytelling?
So I think storytelling now has become a buzzword, and that can mean sort of anything. Any kind of tip or trick or something about how, making something more engaging is sort of called storytelling. And so they'll say, and some of it is sort of making your story a little bit cuter, a little bit more engaging. And story building is building the right story to tell. So it's a different
Mm,
phase. What I do with companies is we analyze their customer, or we analyze their service. We map out on a storytelling framework. This is step one, step two, step three, and it ends up and you bring people along the normal steps they'll go through when they encounter a brand, and you give them the right information at the right time to end up in increasing engagement. But then you can make a website, you can make a video, you can make a ad campaign, you can make a pitch deck, you can go on stage and make and do song and dance. So I do help companies with actually creating those artifacts or those assets or whatever. But before doing that, it's the core story structure that's worth building. Often a lot of companies, well, they'll have this, very engaging story, but people don't understand and don't make the link, and it's engaging for the wrong reason. Sometimes you'd see commercials that were really funny, and then you don't remember what brand it was.
Mm.
So yes, they made it engaging. There was storytelling, but it was the wrong story.
So you talked about story building as building the right story to tell. When it comes to the story structure, like you were talking about, what are the most vital parts of the structure in order to help fit the people or help the companies fit their story into the customer?
So my theory on what happens in our brain when we encounter a brand is we go through three stages. And those three stages I call recognition, and that's what I hinted about before, the idea that you recognize yourself in the brand. Perception, where we need to understand what's going on, and projection, where we imagine what it'll be like. So basically, if I don't recognize myself in a brand, I'll already scroll and look at someone else. So you've got people that somehow match your ideal client. So then they have to understand. So what do I compare it to? People like to put you in a box. What are your benefits? What are the you have to understand. I think clarity is way more important than cleverness. Sometimes you have this cool thing and you're not quite sure what it means. Well, and so once people are convinced, they think I should really use that CRM. I mean, it has AI this and it automates that and it's going to help me build my business. Then there's a moment of doubt where they say, so I have to buy it, install it, learn how to use it, continue using my old system while I'm using my new system and not lose data, but also, I have these Excel spreadsheets and stuff. And so I think, I have to really do this, but maybe I'll come back next week, and then I don't. So if you can help them, close their eyes and imagine what it'll be like, and then sort of check those boxes. Hey, we have a one-click installation and we automate the transfer from HubSpot to things, and we can do that. And then you'll avoid all these problems. And then imagine how your life will be better. And by having them sort of pre-live using your product or your service, they're a few steps further along in the engagement. Most companies sort of want you to click, learn more by, schedule a meeting, whatever it is, when people are still sort of not quite sure. Here, you sort of bring them along and they're already a little bit living what you propose. And so when they click that button, they're farther along. So you have better clients coming in at the top, and you bring them along farther into the engagement. So the trick is to try to make this story where the recognition is about identity, about aspiration, about challenges and things, and then the solution and the benefits, and then this idea of if you don't switch, you're going to still struggle and you're going to waste time, and then imagine how automatically clients will show up at your door and you'll be successful. Thanks. And that was long winded, but the last thing I would say is there's a lot of emotion in all this. It's not, your problem. There's always a practical problem, but then there's the emotion going with it, sort of. So I mow lawns, wow, yippee doo. So for who? Is this, company property, public parks, private houses? So I say, you know, homeowners really want to have a, beautiful environment. But, gardening is, you come home from work and you're tired and it's your back acts up and, but your spouse is, yelling at you. And so we have this great service. We take care of everything. Imagine how you'll be proud in front of your neighbors when you have that barbecue.
Mm.
It's not about, you know, your grass will be shorter. That's the thing. No, it's about the frustration at the beginning and the being proud at the end or things like that. People, you know, all the studies show that we make our decisions emotionally and then we rationalize and find, the, logical reason to justify our gut decision. So bring them along that emotional path.
I love that, John. That's an amazing answer. So then I was gonna say with that, with the whole logical versus emotional approach, if you're saying that it's not necessarily about how short your grass is gonna be, it's about how your neighbor's gonna look at you and be like, "Wow, this guy, he's got this amazing grass, this amazing, new status symbol of what he has." When it comes to these problems for any type of companies, do you think it's important and I would say even necessary to look at all of the logical problems that you solve and turn it into an emotional one?
I mean, it's hard to generalize in the sense that if you're a
That's
if
fair.
you're a plumber and someone has a leaky faucet, the emotional aspect won't be the same. But if you're a wealth manager, there'll be a lot around peace of mind, not just you know uh, profit and returns and things like that. You don't erase all the practical issues, but there is that level that's included, and then you probably need to find one of the problems with companies is they do so many different things. So you tell them, let's make a story, and they say, well, I mean, so we do this and this and this and this for him, and there, and that story. So by being outside the company, I can help sort of saying, okay, let's narrow it down to some major issues that problems that you solve, aspirations that you help, and things. And then at the end, you can come back and say, and you'll avoid this, this, this. I mean, so there's a way of prioritizing and finding what is this core issue. And sometimes it's not what people think. Often companies, I find, will say, we offer a service. So the problem must be that the problem is that they don't have my service. And, I mow lawn, so the problem is that the grass is long. But it's not that simple. The problem is that they're frustrated, that they fight with their spouse, that they're ashamed of their yard. The problem is different. I coached a humanitarian NGO in water purification. And basically, in developing countries, when you're outside of the normal water infrastructure, you ship chlorine in powder form by truck, and you dump it in the water, and that kills the bacteria, and it makes it safe to drink. And so they have a system where you produce the chlorine locally with electrolytes and salt and water instead of shipping the chlorine by truck. And so I said, what's the problem and you're solving? And they say, well, people get sick. Well, no. The problem is that trucks get stuck in the mud. So what they're doing is the people in the field, their frustration is if that truck doesn't arrive, the water is going to turn bad again. Of course, at the end of the day, the point is to, avoid people getting sick. But their solution is actually solving a logistic problem. And if you
Hmm.
talk about that, you connect really with what keeps them up at night. And often companies don't see that. They're more at the practical level, and they're going to advertise by saying, "Hey, we make clean water." Well, sure, of course, but no, we have a system that is done locally, so you avoid the truck delivery issues. And so understanding your customer is not just understanding sort of who they are and things like that, but how they think and how they define their problem, what vocabulary they use, and stuff like that.
That's so fascinating how it's a whole field of like how our emotions can sway our decisions and make us see something different than like it's like yeah, the logical solution is what we do, but if we frame it in an emotional way as humans, we're like, oh wait a second, now it's like actually makes sense to me. That's awesome. Just so I'm understanding the idea of recognition, perception, and projection clearly, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you said recognition is like who they are, like what the company does from a company perspective, like recognition is who we are, what we do. Perception is how the customer sees us, and then is projection the problems that the customer is dealing with as far as the friction that goes along with it?
Yeah. So recognition is me as a customer saying, "Ooh, this company works with people like me or company like mine." I recognize that. But you walk down the street, you want to have a coffee with a friend, and you pass by three cafes without even slowing down, and then the fourth one, you think that's for me. And so this recognition is sometimes a little bit subtle, but really we'll go into that clothing shower store instead of this one because somehow it matches who I am, what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So sometimes it's obvious, I want to get married, so I'll go into a wedding store, fine. But but there's that, yes. And then perception is the fact that they understand clearly what you do. And then the projection is for them to imagine what it'll be like and to sort of solve all these obstacles that they would be in their head, and then revive the stakes and the positive future that you're promising to get them excited to go that one step further.
Do you think without one, the one after that destroys the company or the customer's perception?
Without one, I didn't get that.
Yeah, so, like, for example, if there's no recognition, you can't have the perception because the people aren't gonna recognize that this is for them to begin with. Without perception, you can't really have the projection, and so on and so forth. Would you agree with that, or do you think it's kind of like if one is missing, it harms it, but it doesn't necessarily kill the customer
Well,
perception of
no,
what you do?
there are a lot of companies out there that sort of advertise what they do. you know? And so if I'm searching for, a landscaper, I'll land on companies that do landscaping, and then I'll end up picking one, and because I figure out what they do and I still understand
Yeah.
somehow, but it's just that there's a good chance that they might, scroll and go to your competitor instead, or hesitate. Hesitation today, people switch so fast. They click on one, they don't quite get it, they'll go to the next one, which I don't think is a good thing. I mean, I think there's a lot of times when you swipe a little bit too fast without, working on the thing. But it's all about. There's even a marketing book called "Don't Make Them Think" or something like that,
Hmm.
where this idea you really want, and so it's just a way where people along the way it does it other things. So when I recognize myself, I start looking at what you offer with already a level of trust. When we go back to the accountant that works only for landscapers, I already think, okay, these guys must know their thing if they're specialized. And then in this perception things, I mean, you can talk about trust. So, of course, people will put, customer testimonials and logos of their client, recognizable logos of their clients, and all those things add trust. There's a thing about what category you're in. I did this year-long course on category design where, so I worked with this coffee machine company. So they created this coffee machine that was this big automate, big coffee machine. And people would say, "Why would we pay so much for a coffee machine, for bad train station coffee?" Because in their mind, these big coffee machines are just don't make good coffee. And
Mm,
so we worked on vocabulary like it was a coffee shop in a box or a virtual barista. Don't compare us
mm.
to train station coffee, compare us to coffee shop barista coffee. That's what we're offering. And then so it changes the perception and puts you in the right category. This category stuff is fascinating. So you're a young guy. Give me 3 brands of energy drinks.
Not claiming that I drink a lot, but this won't be too hard for me. So I'll say Celsius, Monster, and I'll say Ghost.
Okay, so I guess you're not in Switzerland, but so you're the first one ever. I think I've asked that question to like 500 people, and the first one ever that hasn't said Red Bull first.
Oh, interesting.
And of all the people I've said, they've Red Bull. Monster comes up, and most people struggle to find a third one unless they're actual, they've used it. And I sort of researched it a little bit, and there's like 192 different brands of energy drinks, and Red Bull has 50% market share.
Wow.
And a lot of people think basically energy drink equals Red Bull. So this didn't work with you because you know
'Cause
more
I'm
than
not
everybody.
addicted to caffeine like everybody else my
Exactly.
age.
And so they don't even advertise their product anymore. They just advertise doing crazy
Mm.
shit. And if you can get into that thing where you become the category, that can be very powerful. But anyways, that was a side thing. I forget what the question was.
You're just talking about categories, and I think you were finishing up talking about the different levels of, like, what recognition is, what perception and projection is, but
Yeah.
I think you were
And so, and again, if you don't on a lot of websites it says, hey, one, download, two, install, three, do this or whatever. You sign up for Spotify, it'll say, create an account, tell us your 5 favorite bands, and we'll produce a playlist you can share with your friends or whatever. I use Apple Music, but in people's minds, it's sort of like, ooh. I get the steps. That's easy. And often 3 steps is good. And that's already a little bit of this idea of helping people project into what it'll be like. And so streaming music is pretty simple. And so if you offer a service that's a little bit more complicated, they have to figure out, so, hey, come and do story building. Well, okay, what does that entail? And so if you can bring them through, and, you know, I've worked with all these companies, and what's come out is they'll say that align the team by building the story together. I worked at this company, I had 10 people, and I asked them to write down what the company did. And I had 10 different stories. And at the
Mm,
end, they built the story together, and that story became their story independently of the customer engagement part. And it created kind of focus. That's what we're about. We're about these people and, and their positive future. And it's sort of, this alignment and this focus, is almost worth as much as the marketing story that we produced.
yeah,
So, yes. So none of this is necessary. I mean, I'm sure there are websites where you go on and you click and you buy something, and there's nothing about recognition and there's nothing about projection, and they still work. You walk into a supermarket, you buy milk. Well, what really did they do to make? So this is sort of about, if you want to stand out, it that's how it sort of makes a difference. But there's a million companies out there, and some of them have been successful for decades, and they still do the same. They have the same message 50 years later, and fine. But I think they could do better.
yeah. Do you think that the story that the team tells itself is the prerequisite to a good story for the customer? Like, do they have to be on board first?
I think it's really important. In the sense that people are really aware of consistency. So you see an ad, and then you go on the website, and then you get the product, or you talk to a salesperson or something. And if somehow, the ad is all about this friendly stuff, and then you go into the store and the person is obnoxious or doesn't know the stuff, well, you're disappointed. Or you click on an ad where it's about one feature that grabs you, and then you land on the homepage of the website, and that particular product, you have to go search for it. And sort of you're kind of
Mm,
disappointed. So I think it makes things, if everyone's talking about the same story, the salesperson will tell one story, the ads will tell the same story, you'll have the same story on your website. When you pitch to investors, it'll be the same story, that and all that leverages itself. Um,
yeah.
and your customers start, you know, getting a persona of your company instead of just a list of services.
How important is it to really clarify what the company is not about? Because I think it's important for people, same thing with recognition. They see who you are, but it's also you're talking about niching down and being more specific. Talk about how important it is to make sure that people aren't coming to my podcast, for example, hoping for advice on mowing their lawns.
So I think that's done in 2 ways. One is, if you have a really clear recognition phase, well, by default, if you say young fathers worry about how they feed their newborns, well, if you're not a young father, you're not going to stop. And
Sure,
so
yeah, that's a good point.
you're already, I mean, it's already about, we're not for everybody else. And you don't really have to, make that more explicit. But some other times you can do that on purpose to sort of say, usually you do it like this, but we do it like that. So, I mean, if you want to do it like that, that's fine, but that's not us. We do it this way. And that can be really powerful as well. I mean, depending what you do, I don't have the perfect example that comes to mind, but, we don't work with, big companies. We only work with small companies. Small companies will feel, okay, they take care of us because of that.
Yeah, that sounds. I think that's one thing that I feel like I've struggled with in the past is not niching down, maybe even up to today, to be completely honest. Not niching down because I'm scared of the whole idea of losing customers, or I guess listeners in my case. But it's kind of counterintuitive the fact that me not niching down makes people also not listen to me as well. So, like going down the funnel, being more specific makes more people want to listen to me because they feel like the show is calling out to them as opposed to, oh, this is just a general podcast for anybody, then it's not specific. Because I think for me, like the person that says, "Hey, the show is for," just an example, like young entrepreneurs who are doing XYZ are going to get a lot more quality people as opposed to the person who might be doing the same thing, but not clarifying that that's what his show is about.
No, I think so too. And then while you're listening, you sort of feel that there are people, the other people that are listening are sort of part of your tribe, and you're part of a thing because it's all about this is the young entrepreneur club or whatever, and that's the place to learn. And then you can highlight specific challenges. You know, you're
Yeah,
not a seasoned businessman that's looking for marketing advice. You're a newbie looking for marketing advice. So it's sort of
true.
it can't be things like, avoid these, easy mistakes and do these things, and you feel that you match the need better. And so that, the seasoned person that comes along will say, well, yeah, well, I knew, I made that mistake 20 years ago. I'm good. Well, yeah, but I mean, you made it clear that that's you were targeting a certain person. So everyone, that works out. It's a win-win where people don't listen to the wrong podcast. People that are the perfect match, get the perfect the thing. So who is your ideal listener? Who will get the most out of your podcast?
Is that a rhetorical question or is it an actual question?
Uh, as you like.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess, because you're giving me a lot of ideas, you're probably inspiring me to, like, make a little bit of a shift, but I think I do have a lot of younger skewing audience, but, something that I haven't done yet is really define the, like, "Okay, this is who this is for." So, it ends up being this kind of uneven spread of more younger skewing, but then, like, some older people, and it's kinda like, "Okay, what do we got going on over here?" So, I think the lack of clarity might be working against me, so that's something I gotta do for this podcast. So, thank you. I mean, this has turned into, like, you consulting me.
But the other thing I think is that a lot of companies create personas too quickly.
Mm,
The characteristics you said were younger and older, and that might not be the criteria. The criteria might be you want to make a shift. You're starting a project. You're starting a new endeavor. You're at a pivotal moment in your life, and you want to change something, and that can resonate with some young people and older people. But you resonate with a kind of mindset instead of trying to match demographics. So
interesting.
you might find out that, well, you know, you're targeting young entrepreneurs. Well, early entrepreneurs are often young. Well, fine. But, I coach a lot of startups, and now and then I have these 45-year-old or 50-year-old people that are doing startups, and they're struggling with the same issues, and it's the level of maturity that's important, not the actual age of the person. And
Oh, I
so
like that.
and so what do when listening to your podcast, what is my aspiration, and what am I struggling with that you can help with, that will, push me forward? And so how can you define that? And then it doesn't matter if it's a man, a woman, old,
Mm.
young, whatever. Yeah. So I find that interesting.
That is I find that extremely interesting. That's amazing. I think that's something that I wish I had that. I mean, I'm happy you gave me that advice because it's opening up so many avenues for me because it's always I feel like some people are like, "Okay, who are you targeting as far as age, gender, where are they from?" But I really like this approach of targeting the mindset as well. But my next question for you would be, how can somebody go about targeting, like, the actual mindset? Does that mean you just have to use similar language that they're using? You have to see how they think, or how does that work?
Well, sometimes, it's really just a clear thing. So say you're starting early stage startup entrepreneurs. And then if I identify myself as early stage, is that it's an idea. I might have a little, a few mock-ups or things and thinking about it, and I'm sort of at that stage. And then you bring, how do you validate the idea? There are things that happen at that stage. And so then anybody can fit into that. But the guy that mows lawns, he talked about homeowners. Well, homeowner isn't that you could have a young homeowner, hopefully that still exists, and then some older homeowners and whatever. And so take Nike. They have this just do it thing. And so it seems that some people actually buy sneakers to run. I mean, everyone buys them to look cool. But somehow, there are some sports brands that sort of, I mean, it's for sports. And Nike with this Just Do It is a way of targeting this aspiration to achieve something. And that can be to be popular, that can be to, or to play basketball or whatever it is. So they use, I mean, there's this kind of a sports metaphor, but then it's become more than that because they're targeting the aspiration more than the person.
That's
And
so
that
interesting.
person might be actually both. I mean, you might have two pairs of sneakers, one to look cool and one to actually run. And depending on the moment of the day, you'll sort of react to one or the other. So does it really matter that you're, whatever, 22 or whatever age you are? Um, More than the fact that, you're out there. I mean, you built this podcast. You've met so many people. I mean, there's this hunger for, learning and understanding the world and connection and things. I mean, if people can feel that, they can have a kind of mirror in some sense, you're targeting people that have that same aspiration as you.
Yeah.
So you go to the trouble of doing all the work and we get to just sit back and listen. But somehow we're looking for something similar when with your podcast.
Whew, John, this is good. I really like this, and I really like how you mentioned the whole idea of you said targeting aspirations to the person as far as like from the Nike perspective, because it makes me think about the fact that for the aspiration, a lot of people I relate this to my podcast is the way that I see it. I know my friends are like this as well. Is we all have 24 hours in the day, and some people have just done some amazing things with their life, and this whole I always think about this idea, and it's the idea of like leverage, and then you have your workers, and then you can build stuff up and scale, but despite that, I think that a really big thing that people overlook is mindset, and depending on how you look at things dictates the results that you get. For example, your book is very unconventional in a way that people talk about storytelling. People talk about, yeah, relate to the audience and people are going to want to join you on your mission. But you're saying, no, like here are the three parts. You want to build your story. You want to fit the mission of what you're doing into the other people so they feel like they're getting the reward and they're getting the thing, right? Which I think is absolutely awesome. So with the whole idea of mindset, it's like there are so many amazing, cool people out there like you that I get to speak to, and it's like, okay, I want to pick your brain. I wish, like, if I could, metaphorically, I want to just like know everything you're thinking about. I want to see when I'm doing marketing for my podcast, like for my book or something. How are you thinking about the story? How are you thinking about all these things? So, I think the idea of relating aspirationally might be something that I'm gonna try doing because it's like these are the people that I want to listen to my podcast, people that think the same way as I do. And I think despite the age, like you talked about the idea of maturity, which I think is very interesting. You said it's you're targeting the maturity of a person, which might be, early stage entrepreneurs, people that think like me, for example. So you're just giving me a lot of ideas. So this is very, very cool.
So it can also be, in your case, it really feels like the aspiration you're targeting. In some cases, you're targeting a problem.
Hmm.
And so, and then you're targeting the people that have that problem, and that problem is part practical and part emotional. Um, and you want to be fit and be feel better in your body, because you have, I don't know, a gym or a thing, but somehow it's not just the young crazy weightlifters you're targeting. It's people that sort of want to get change how they feel, and that can be men, women, older, younger, coming out of illness, or whatever it is. It's that pivotal moment, where they have an issue and they're struggling, and you can help them overcome that struggle, and they recognize themselves in the struggle. And if you can contrast the aspiration with the struggle, that's even stronger. Sort of like you would really like to, but kind of thing.
Interesting.
Because
I like that.
if you're in your case, you want to hear all these different stories, learn about the world, learn about new ideas, you want to all these things, but where do you find that? How do you, I mean, what do I, and so, you're coming with the aspiration and bringing, you're solving the problem by bringing the people together. Um, and so there's that mix.
Do you think that combining aspiration and demographics gives you more of an advantage when you're niching down, or do you think it could harm as well?
All depends what you're doing. I mean, if you're selling clothes, I'm sure there's identity, aspiration, all that. But I mean, it's a lot about demographics. You're not going to sell the same clothes to
Sure, yeah.
young girls to old men and all that kind of thing. And sometimes the identity part, the demographics is part of the identity
Mhm,
of Spanish language radio station. Well, I mean, so there'll be some identity in there because
yeah,
you're targeting a community in the United States that is, all these things. So I think it's all three. There's some kind of identity, aspiration and challenge. I'm just saying that too often you start and your limit, companies limit themselves to the demographics part. And I think if you start with the aspiration and the challenge and then figure out which are the people that
yeah.
actually fit that, there will be the demographics that come in, you know, um, uh, you're talking about young fathers. Well, young fathers aren't 60 years old most of the time. So it all comes together. It's just that I find that there's that shortcut of just demographics that you can do better when you look a little bit wider than that.
I love that so much. I think, yeah, that's amazing. How starting with the problem, it makes a lot of sense as well because a lot of people, myself included, I might look at something and be like, okay, I'm targeting 18 to 34-year-olds and let's say like men, for example. But then it's like, okay, I could be targeting these people. But if I get 18 to 34-year-old men, they're like, well, why am I listening to this? Like, what's the point of this? I think that's very interesting. As far as you have a lot of experience consulting people in marketing as well, what are some of the biggest mistakes, other than the ones you just talked about, people make when story building?
Um, well, I mean, part is, of course, being too vague, not niching down. I think also, you know, they lose track of their customer a little bit, and the goal becomes, improving the product or the service more than, you know, better serving your customers, and that
Hmm.
focus on the customer uh, is important. I find that often they don't really know. Yeah, if you ask them, "Who is this for? Who's your ideal customer?" and it's sort of everybody, and it's not really. And that lack of focus, even if they don't really necessarily go in and change their website, this idea that they have a better understanding and it's more explicit who they're serving and why and what the thing is, you know, brings extra focus to the company, to the service. Yeah, for me, it's, my company's name is Standpoint because I think it's so important to take the other person's, standpoint. And for a company to step out and look at themselves from the outside, all day long, they're doing their work, they're doing the operations, they're looking at the sales. I mean, they're inside looking out. So to stop and step out and look from the outside in can be quite transformative.
Yeah, that's amazing. John, a theoretical question for you. So let's say that all the things that you've talked about, your book, your experience consulting with businesses, all just disappeared and you had to leave the world with one thing. What would it be?
So I don't get to leave things I've actually done. I need to read the world where I've lost my experience, my book, and all my expertise.
So yeah, I'm gonna rephrase it a little bit better. You lost it as a way like people can't access to it. You still have all the experience up here. What is something you'd leave with the world that you think would help them from any perspective that you want to go through? But the book is theoretically still there. It's just people can't see it.
Well, I sort of when I was young, I really had trouble with conflict, and so I sort of practice. If I had something difficult to tell you, I would sort of say it in my head and sort of imagine how you would react and sort of
Mm,
practice it kind of thing. And I think that's become it was a defense mechanism kind of, but then it became a kind of superpower. And so
uh,
now I go into when I talk to a company, it's about and they talk about their customer, I can sort of go into the customer's shoes, see it from the customer's perspective, but also in life. I think if you're going to, convince your girlfriend to go to the beach instead of the mountains, somehow it's you take her standpoint and the thing, and the structure could be pretty similar. And so, yeah, I guess it's it all comes from empathy, and in business as in life. And I think, yeah, I think the world is especially lacking in empathy these days.
Do you think that's something I guess you just said it's lacking, but do you think that's something you wish more people had? Because I think empathy and I think even bad experiences allow the person to not want other people to deal with something similar, so they lean more towards, like, okay, maybe they were lacking in a certain thing when they were younger, but now they're older and they learn how to do this. They're excelling at this thing, they're really good at it, and now they wanna make sure that other people aren't going through the same things. Do you think that empathy is a superpower of business?
So I would hope so, in the sense that I do find that there are some people that have gone through life and said, I struggled. Why would the young kid not have to go through the same thing as me? I earned it.
Sure.
And so is it, it's not all about, I went all through the hard stuff, so now I can tell you how to not. But I mean, there are a lot of books and experts out there where the whole point is, uh, you know, I I struggled through something and I can help you avoid the struggle. There's this great author. He wrote the first book called The Mom Test. And the Mom Test is all about this idea that you have to be clear with your project, and that you have to be almost, explain it to your mom kind of thing. And
I
that
like
became
that.
there was a kind of cult following in this Mom Test. And this is, 20 years ago or more. And so he started doing workshops, and he struggled to organize them, and he kind of cracked the code. So he wrote a second book on how to build good workshops. And then he tried to sell this book, and then he struggled with the publishing and getting thing. And then he cracked the code. And this third book is how to write useful books. His whole thing was, I struggled through something, and I can help you make it easier, even if those things, aren't completely related. And I thought that was a great thing. Empathy is this idea that you take the other's point of view, and it's about mixing with other people and not always seeing the world from through your eyes, but how they could feel it, and to not hold on to your certainties too strongly, but sort of say, okay, I get that. That's not me, but I get that that's how you would feel it, and things. And when you're closed into one environment, one thing, and you've never really gotten out of that, it's hard then to sort of imagine what it's like. And so, the diversity of talking to many different people, I used to change jobs every 2 years because I was bored. Now I change jobs every 2 hours because I meet new people, new projects, and some really deep tech, crazy stuff, and then humanitarian the other side. And then, I worked with the world leader of garden shoes, and all that is really builds that empathy muscle.
Despite all those different industries that you were, going into, you said you liked the change that was going on. Is there a lot of similarities from the principles of, like, marketing despite all of the different industries of the people that you're helping consult?
Very much so. I mean, I've done B2B, B2C, and NGOs and nonprofits and whatever. The one that seems to be a little bit different is luxury. And so there's a university here in Geneva, and I'm building a 3-day course for their master degree in luxury marketing, to what are the luxury narratives, storytelling in luxury. Because it's not about solving a problem, it's about something else. If you want, I mow lawns. Well, you have your lawn's a mess, and then your lawn will be nicer. And that's not what luxury does. But you could be a wealth manager, you could sell a car, you can be a teacher. All these things, somehow there's an aspiration, a challenge, and you make their life better. So mostly yes. And then I think there's a few exceptions out there. We have to step back and think a little bit differently.
Sure. John, you are awesome. Where can people find you at? Shout out any links, shout out your books. The floor is all yours.
So the first thing you can go to, I have a website called Standpoint, but it's standpoint.ch. CH is for Switzerland. So you go to standpoint.ch, you'll find links to my book, what I do, the method. I just published a tagline builder that goes through all these extra, steps on that. But go to my contact form, drop me a line. Tell me that you're coming from Elan's podcast, and I'll give you an hour of, consulting. We can talk about your brand, talk about, how you can.
John, thank you so much. Tell my listeners, I'll see you guys next Tuesday.